Welcome to a brand new video. Thank you so much for being here. As always, I truly appreciate it. Today I am showing you guys how I built some window box planters for 2 windows out on the front of my house. I had been mulling over this idea for the past year, and at the beginning of this spring season I decided now is the time. And so basically I just started by measuring the area in front of each of my windows and figuring out how large I wanted my boxes to be, and then just drew up a little sketch with measurements. It's nothing complicated or nothing overly detailed. I had intended on using as much scrap wood as possible, but unfortunately I had no scrap wood in my garage that was big enough to use for this project, so I had to go out and buy all new wood. I think I ended up spending about $100. And I did get pine wood rather than cedar, which is supposed to be the best for planter boxes, but since I knew I was going to be painting mine and also I'm cheap. So after I picked up all of my wood, I just started measuring out where I needed to make my cuts and just started cutting away with my table saw. But I did double check a lot of my cuts for each box to make sure the pieces matched up as well as possible so I would have a good square box. And as the old man always said, measure twice, cut once. So I tend to err on the side of caution with usually cutting a little bit bigger than where my mark is if I can, just because you can always cut more off, you can never add more back. And then I just use my nail gun to attach the wood boards together. Screws probably would have been the better choice, but I am someone who likes easy peasy lemon squeezy, and the nail gun just goes super quick. But I made sure I used my larger brad nails and really nailed the heck out of them to make sure everything was nice and stable, nothing was gonna fall apart. I set my boxes up so the 2 ends would have the raw edges, so that doesn't really bother me. After I sanded everything down, you can't really tell anyway, but I just think that makes so your front face is nice and clean looking. And I just used my hands to run them along the edge to make sure I had everything squared up and as smooth as possible. And something that I completely forgot to even think about when I was initially drawing up my plans was the bottom part of the box. So I had these nice little open squares, and then I was like, oh shoot, I gotta put a bottom in them. So I did not prepare or measure for that, but I was able to dig through my garage and find some different pieces of wood I was able to use. Since these are not visible at all when they are mounted up, I really did not care what they were gonna look like, so I just had some old plywood that I used and cut down to size, and I nailed the bottom pieces in to the square as well, which I know is a little bit iffy. I nailed the heck out of it, so it'll really hold, but I think I may go back and add some extra supports under here just to be safe. Like I had said, using screws is probably going to give you more support and better peace of mind, but I just love how quick using a nail gun makes the process go. And then I had another random piece of wood in my garage that I used for the second box. So I picked up 2 different types of molding, one thinner and one thicker. I played with them a little bit to figure out which one I wanted on the top and which one I wanted on the bottom. I ended up putting the smaller one on top and the thicker one on the bottom. And what I did was cut the large front pieces for this first. And when it comes to angled cuts, I always have to overthink about it or I'm gonna do it wrong. And definitely with angled cuts like this, I always overshoot when cutting because with the angles, you can end up cutting off more than you intended real quick. So I'd rather go back and cut off little bits at a time than accidentally making one too short of cut. But all of the front facing pieces had the same exact angled cuts and were the same size, so I was able to just go through and do all of those first. And then I placed them on just to make sure everything seemed to line up properly. And then for the side pieces, I was able to just use my pencil and make a mark for where I needed to cut. And then after I had all my pieces cut and ready to go, I went back with my nail gun and attached them to the boxes. Again, I started with those front-facing pieces and got those lined up as best as I could so that the tops of them were just flush completely with the box. You can hardly see the crack. And then I went ahead and attached all of the side pieces. And something I was really surprised by was how fast this project went. I expected it to drag out a little bit, like most of my projects do, but you could honestly knock this whole project out in a weekend. I built both of these boxes in one day. The only reason things dragged out a little bit more is because I painted mine. After my boxes were assembled, I had all the molding on. I went back in with some wood filler and filled in all of my nail holes, any imperfections in the wood. And I like to use a spatula for any part of the surface that's flat, but I find it much easier with like wood filler or spackle or anything is to just use my finger, especially with the molding pieces that have the curves in them and whatnot. I also use this on the raw edges on the side to fill in any of that roughness before I sanded. And then when all of that was dried, I went in with a sanding block, probably about 150 grit, and sanded everything down. The sanding sponges or blocks like I'm using here are a little bit more pricey than regular sandpaper, but I find them so much easier to work with and they last so much longer, and they're really nice if you're not sanding a flat surface. Like if you have molding or anything that has grooves and details in it, I find the sanding blocks work a lot better than just regular sandpaper. And after everything was sanded smooth, I did give my boxes a wipe down before I started to paint. I just finished up completely painting my stairs and part of the wall this color blue, and I had tons of leftover paint, which actually was kind of what inspired me to make these window boxes in the first place. So I figured this was a really good use of all that leftover paint, especially because this is the Benjamin Moore Advanced Alkylid paint. I swear by this paint. It is a little bit more pricey, but as far as like high traffic areas or furniture or anything that you need to have like a really good durable finish, doors, this is it. This is the paint. So like I said, I just finished painting my staircase in my house with this. So far it's holding up great. And as you can see, the coverage on this wood is also amazing. Like normally the wood would just slurp this paint right up, but you can see the color payoff is immediate. What's really interesting too is my hallway staircase where I use this paint gets very little natural lighting, and the blue looks so much like darker and moodier. And after I started applying it to my window boxes, I was like shook because it doesn't even look like the same color. It's so much lighter and brighter on these boxes than it is in my hallway. It's kind of crazy. And I did end up doing 2 coats of paint. The thing with this Benjamin Moore Advanced paint is you have to wait 16 hours or more between coats. So before I put down my second coat, I went back in with some sandpaper, I think probably in the 200s range, and smoothed everything out again just to make sure I get that nice finish. And then of course I did wipe them down after sanding, and then went back in and gave them a second coat of my blue paint. I'm going to put a lot of the product details in the description box, but I believe this color is called Inky Blue, and it is a Sherwin-Williams color. And then after the 2 coats of the blue paint, I knew I needed to put some sort of high quality top coat on these to protect them from water and the elements, and what I ended up getting is this oil-based spar urethane. And again, I went back in before putting that top coat on with some sandpaper, I think around 600 grit. And with polyurethanes and clear top coats, I prefer to use a sponge brush. I just find that it applies easier. I also prefer the sponge brushes because you can just throw them away when you're done with them rather than having to worry about cleaning a brush with mineral spirits. This spar urethane is specifically formatted for exterior use. I have not used this version of polyurethane before. I've used the interior stuff before, and I always think that gives a really nice, like, hard, durable finish. So I figured this would be just as good. The only issue that I ran into was this stuff was not wanting to dry clear. It has kind of a brownish tint to it. But after my boxes had sat around long enough and should have been dry, I could still see like brown colored streaks on the paint, and I was very concerned about this, but I chalked that up to being the changes in the temperature. These boxes were sitting in my garage with temperature shifts between like probably 30 and 60 degrees. So I think they just took a longer time for that clear coat to cure. And I ended up doing 2 coats of the spar urethane just to make sure I got everything covered really well. Apparently forgot to video it, but I also applied this to the inside of the boxes with the raw wood. Even though I knew I was going to be lining the inside of these boxes with plastic, I just wanted to, you know, give them that longevity. And for the plastic linings, I just used the large heavy-duty contractor garbage bags. I had some of these in my basement, and I just was able to use one for each box, and I just placed it inside, folded the edges so they would sit nicely around the rim of the boxes, and just used a staple gun to staple them to the wood. How you would fold the corners for like wrapping paper around a box is exactly how I folded the corners on the inside of these boxes with the plastic. And so for mounting these on my brick exterior, I went back and forth quite a bit trying to decide what I want to do. And initially what I wanted to do was have some really nice aesthetically pleasing corbels or brackets made out of wood. But as I found with my research, those kind of corbels are very expensive and not in my budget right now. So I ended up with these metal brackets that I found at Home Depot, and I think each one is rated for like 50 pounds or more. So then before I drilled my drainage holes, I made the marks of where my brackets are gonna go, so I don't drill any of my drainage holes where the brackets are gonna sit. Getting the brackets up on my brick exterior, I used my tape measure and a Sharpie marker and made the hole marks using the Sharpie marker on my brick. And then I went in with my hammer drill to make the proper holes. I also picked up a set of masonry screws specifically to use for this. So I had a few random drywall anchors that I shoved in the holes just to use as like a starting point for getting those screws in there. My screws were much longer than those anchors were, but like I said, it worked really well for just getting those screws started. And then I went back in with my drill and drilled some pilot holes in the bottom and just used some smaller, shorter wood screws to attach the brackets to the bottom of the box. Now, I do not have the box itself attached to the brick exterior. I did not feel that was necessary since these shelf brackets were rated to hold so much weight. However, if I do notice them starting to sag or having any issues, I will probably go back in and attach the boxes to the brick exterior as well. But like I said, I just did not feel like it was necessary at this point. And now for the part that I was so excited for and couldn't wait to get to, and that is planting these little babies up. And I picked up a variety of pansies as well as some sweet potato vine. I thought it would look really nice spilling over the front of these boxes, so I will keep these in here through the summer. And now let's take a look at the finished product. All right, you guys, here is a look at how my planter boxes turned out. These pansies make me so happy. They are so cute. I also need to fertilize them, but they should kind of puff up and get a little more volume going in here. And my plan is to leave these sweet potato vines all summer, and hopefully those will grow in nice and big and cascade down the front. That top coat waterproof sealer that I used seems to have dried down and looks a lot more clear than it has. You can still see a little bit of streaking, but it's a lot better than it was looking a couple days ago when it was still sitting in my garage. I had to shim one. They still need a little bit of help, but my plan is to basically get some facade covers that are like corbels to just like stick over on top of them and paint them blue to match, just to give it a little more oomph, zhuzh it up a little. I don't know when I'm gonna get to that. The ones that I was looking at, they're pretty expensive and it's not currently in my budget. So if I don't get to that this year, I'm hoping the sweet potato vines will cascade enough to kind of cover those so you don't really see them anyway, because they aren't the most attractive. So hopefully, like I said, these will beef up in a couple of weeks and look a little bit more impactful from further away. They're definitely not perfect, but I am proud of my work. I think they look really nice. I think they're higher quality than most things I could have bought in a store. If you enjoyed watching this, maybe learned something, got some ideas, inspiration, I would truly appreciate if you could give this video a thumbs up, as well as consider subscribing to my channel if you like DIY and home related projects like this. Thank you guys so much for spending some time with me today, and I will see you real soon in my next video.